not everyone in the world can be a fighter pilot. Just the same way, not everyone can be a modeler. That's unique skill set. Part of what the new generation of capabilities and technologies and architectures enable is that not everyone has to be a fighter pilot to take advantage of the power that exists when you're able to bring those capabilities in a more simplistic way to sort of mere mortals who are not super duper modelers, right?
The modeling team's customers are asking for more granular questions to be answered through modeling. I want to know, what is the impact of shutting down this plant or this line every week? And I want to know it for every plant and every line in the system. That's the nature of granularity of the question. And the modeling teams are like, what do we do here?
The modelers will shape the future of supply chains, right? And I think probably in more profound ways going forward than they ever have been able to because of all these underlying capabilities.
Welcome.
Yes.
Welcome to the Lyric podcast. Razat, thanks for joining us. We're excited to have this conversation today. So I'm head of go-to-market here at Lyric. We're joined today by Ganesh Ramakrishnan, who's our founder and CEO. We are especially honored to have Razat Gaurav with us today. Razat is currently the CEO at Planview, but we could go back into a history of supply chain excellence. I think a lot of people know Razat in the modeling industry from his work as CEO at Llamasoft, but you might also know him from his days at i2 and mastering the planning aspect of things too. So Ganesh and I have a history with Razat from when we graduated from OpEx into joining Llamasoft in that journey. And Razat also has a deep history and knowledge of the data science area here too. So we are excited to welcome him to this conversation, and we're excited to dive into where things have gone from talking a little bit about history and where we started, and also what's exciting about what companies are graduating into and what we're bringing the world in terms of technology related to modeling and analysis today. Thank you guys for being here and excited for a fun conversation.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Sara.
Yeah.
When we talk about why it's so important that Razat has this background, why is our platform, the Lyric Studio, across all three of those verticals, and why
Yes.
Razat has been such a great resource for us and investor in the company. But what does that come together for in your mind in the industry in terms of those three verticals and how they work as one within organizations?
Yeah, I think the two of us grew up in modeling a lot, and then we made a hard pivot to data science, decision science for about a decade. When we came back to Llamasoft, back to modeling, design, if you want to call it that word, did that for a few years. And then when we left Llamasoft, Coupa, and went on our own journey, we thought we are going to be spending a lot of time in decision science, data science, right? Like for supply chain. And after that experience, Sarah, we started seeing the relevance of the platform first in planning. And that's when I realized, hey, Prasad knows a lot about planning. We never had the need to talk about planning as a space, right? And eventually, in the last 12 months or so, we got pulled into modeling. Obviously, we know Razat knows modeling inside out. And so my interactions with Razat, and I think this is relevant for our conversation today as well, is like the single person who really understands what the state of the art in modeling can be, what the state of the art in planning can be, and what the state of the art in data science, decision science for supply chain can also be. There are a lot of people who know planning well, there are a lot of people who know modeling well, but bringing those two things together, and data science, decision science still is very nascent in our space. I'm really excited to talk to Razat because I've had these private conversations, but bring that conversation to all of us today. I think he'll have very wise things to say for all of us.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So Razat, I didn't know this about you, but I think it's super interesting and mimics what Ganesh and I had gone through. So we both started our career as modelers, if you will, but I didn't know the same about you. So give us a little background on where you started and how you started this journey with all these.
Yeah, look, I was an engineer by training, and I got into the wide world of management consulting, and somehow they figured out that I had a knack for quantitative analysis, and I got thrown into supply chain modeling work, right, in a very coincidental way, and I took up on that and really enjoyed it. And so, yeah, I probably wasn't as good of a modeler as you, Sarah, or Ganesh were. I was probably a horrible modeler. I had a lot of help from a lot of smart people, but in some ways, I'm still a recovering modeler.
As we all
You're
are.
just being modest.
So I think though, Razat, I think one of the things I think to level set this conversation is to talk a little bit about the legacy of modeling. All the time that you spent at Llamasoft and shaping where that business has gone. What have you seen in terms of what we can attribute to the legacy of modeling, to the work that was done at Llamasoft over the years?
Yeah, look, my days with modeling first started off with Excel spreadsheets and access databases. If you remember the early days of CAPS logistics and sales, these were early network optimization tools, right? And I ended up using them as a consultant. And then one of my last engagements, we ended up using a little known product called Supply Chain Strategist at that time. It was founded by these two brilliant guys from MIT, Ken Justin and Bob Dunley. They ended up becoming part of ITLS, which became part of I2. And so this industry has been shaping and forming for the last roughly 30 years, right? In some ways, the story of modeling technologies has mapped to the story of my personal professional journey, right? And I have to say that Llamasoft, more so than any other company, really took a massive leap forward. I would give the Llamasoft founders credit for evolving the industry from supply chain, or like what we thought of as network optimization, to more of a holistic supply chain design framework, right?
Yes.
A lot of that involved really bringing in a broader framework into the modeling scope, where we expanded beyond location level analysis, where to locate in distribution centers, warehouses, manufacturing plants, to getting into the broader realm of inventories and product flows and transportation decision points. Towards the end of Llamasoft, we had about 500 customers, most of which had a center of excellence around supply chain design, supply chain modeling. People called it by different names, but it was essentially that talent base. The challenge has been, I think, multifold. One, there are just not enough modelers in the world.
So true.
And my analogy to that is not everyone in the world can be a fighter pilot. I'd love to be a fighter pilot. I don't have the faculties to qualify to be a fighter pilot, right? Just the same way, not everyone can be a modeler. That's unique skill set. Supply chains for organizations like manufacturing, retail, logistics companies, they don't exist in the ether. They exist in the real world, right? And the real world is full of complexities and interdependencies and constraints. And reflecting that real world, the world of distribution center operations, manufacturing operations, transportation operations, inventory flows, into the constructs of a digital model is a unique skill set. It still continues to be a unique skill set, right? And I think growing that talent continues to be something that the whole industry is working on, right? And I think part of what the new generation of capabilities and technologies and architectures enable is that not everyone has to be a fighter pilot to take advantage of the power that exists when you're able to bring those capabilities in a more simplistic way to sort of mere mortals who are not super duper modelers, right? So I think that's one aspect. The second aspect is the data aspect, right? All of these previous generation of products, while they had more contemporary tech stacks, many of them were born in the desktop, and so there were some limitations to the compute horsepower that they leveraged. I think all three of us remember the days when you did all the scenario analysis, you did all the modeling work, right? And even to get a baseline, you had to run a solve, and you would hit the run button, and then, you know what? Go and do a bunch of other stuff for hours, and just hope that 3, 4, 5, 10 hours later you came back and got a solve, right? And the reason for that was you're still working with billions of permutations and combinations with the different possibilities in the supply chain. but you were constrained by compute horsepower that was on a desktop,
Yes.
right? That obviously changed with the advent of client server technologies initially, but more so with cloud, right? And obviously that's going into a whole new realm that I know Ganesh is very knowledgeable about in terms of distributed computing and new forms of GPUs and things. So I think that's the second aspect that I think is very different. One is the talent. The second is just the compute horsepower has changed so dramatically. It's not even 100x, it's 1,000,000x in some ways of where we were when the three of us started our journey in modeling. And then the third aspect is just data. The data required to do this type of work exists in tens, if not hundreds, of different enterprise systems. And again, one of the common themes with these previous generation of capabilities or tools was that 75-80% of the time was spent in data collection, data cleansing, and just bringing things to a normalized form. The actual scenario formulation and the fun stuff of doing the solves and the what ifing was 20% or less, right?
Yeah.
And in some ways, even though we made improvements in developing the competencies and the hardware improved, the data aspects continue to lag, right? And I remember even at Llamasoft, when our customers were beginning to do a new study, they had to start from scratch every time, right? And a lot of these decisions were not just long-term decisions impacting long multi-year time horizons. Some of these decisions that modelers were being pulled into needed to be impacted for the next quarter or the next month or sometimes even the next week, right? And then these teams were out there trying to collect all the data, and just collecting the data took weeks and weeks, right?
Yes.
I remember talking to so many senior executives. They're like, Razat, we love your stuff. We love all these capabilities. We know it's super powerful, but it just takes us too long. And when we analyzed and diagnosed where all the time was being spent, not surprisingly, it was not in the scenario, the model formulation, or the running of those models. It was really in all the data prep, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the exciting thing is all that can change now with the new architectures developing, the new sort of tools and capabilities emerging. But I think these are the pain points that I think have existed that I think need to be unraveled to take this world of modeling and design to the next phase of evolution.
Absolutely. I love those comments. And also the one about the data, I think, as we're sitting here thinking, as you were saying that, I was like, gosh, so much of the sale of network design software went into, hey, we can optimize this, we can optimize that. But no one ever talked about the fact that 90% of that time was going to be, oh, by the way, you have to bring your data. And the data has to be in the right way, and it's come from many different places. And even when training, when I used to train people, I would tell them, like, listen, this is the fun part. The non-fun part's going to take most of your time, and it's going to be getting the data ready to go into this.
Yeah. No, and I think there's an explanation for everything. It's not like the people in this space were not smart and they were not just left behind. A couple of points I want to add here. One is on the user experience side, right? It did not stay in desktop because they didn't know how to deploy it on the cloud. Supply chain modeling, supply chain design software stayed on the desktop because that's the level of interaction and response that was needed when you were building models. Cloud technology did not have the level of maturity 10 years ago where you could build these models quickly and rapidly. It has taken the second, maybe third decade of evolution
Yes.
in cloud where the user experience can be symmetrical to that on the desktop or close to that on the desktop. So that,
Especially with web interfaces
yeah.
versus the desktop interfaces. I totally agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was a hard trade-off to say, should we put it on the desktop or should we put it on the cloud? When we tried to put something on the server or on the cloud, it was pretty subpar experience. So let's keep that in mind. And we were on the desktop for a good reason, right? Obviously, we had to give up the power of compute on the cloud when we did that, but that was the trade-off. You had to pick one or the other. The second thing is data, right? Razat, I think in the enterprise world, there is nothing like modeling that requires you to pull data from all the supply chain sources. It could be your
Yes.
ERP, it could be your TMS system, it could be a WMS system, it could be your
Yes.
OMS system, multiple
Yes.
systems.
Yes.
And all that data sat inside the application database. When you go back even 10 years,
Yeah.
Snowflake was not that ubiquitous. Data lakes were not that ubiquitous.
No.
So you had to go to the application data source and then pull from there. And that was like pulling teeth.
Yeah.
Now we are in a different place, different world. We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
But that was a ground reality.
Yeah.
And anybody building software in that world had to deal with these two big issues.
Yes.
One is user experience, the other, data was sitting inside application databases.
You mentioned this before, like companies were doing these analyses, they were taking so long and they really needed the answers the next day. I think in the experiences I've had, and I'd love to hear you guys talk about it, is that's no longer an option, that these modelers are being asked to solve problems that are not strategic 1 year down the road questions. As it's not only that the supply chain is getting more complex, but the
Yes.
supply chain is becoming more agile. The modeling has to be able to match that. So Ganesh, I know you've had a lot of conversations with customers lately. What are some of the things that you're seeing or the pressures that are changing on these groups?
Yeah. I think so. So again, I want to repeat what Razat said, paying homage to what the work Llamasoft did, right? Llamasoft made design and modeling design. It's got branded as design, so I'll use the word design at Llamasoft as a competency inside these large businesses. Right? So now people think about a design as a competency that needs to sit inside the business rather than a one-off analysis that comes from outside from consultants, right? 20 years ago. They've gone through the natural evolution of that. Today, when we go talk to a Fortune 500, Global 2000 organizations, they are ready to take the next leap where the modeling team's customers are asking for more granular questions to be answered through modeling, right? Through these network models, inventory models, transportation models, to say, I want the end-to-end answer every week. Why are you giving me once a month? Why are you giving me once a quarter? I want to know what is the impact of shutting down this plant or this line every week. And I want to know it for every plant and every line in the system. Right? That's the nature of granularity of the question. And the modeling teams are like, what do we do here? Right?
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
can
I
we
think,
service our customers?
yeah,
Yeah.
as they should though, Ganesh, right? We've seen the power of applying optimization and prediction to these types of problems, and it's immense.
It
So
is.
if you have these types of problems and you have the architecture to do it, it will pay dividends
It
hugely,
will.
right?
And I think another way to think about this is if you think about the decision funnel that exists in supply chain, right? All the way from decisions that you're making typically that are for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years out, right? These are typically very capital intensive decisions to more what you're trying to do for next year and your initiatives for next year. Historically, what happened was the closer you got to that decision horizon, meaning the nearer term decisions, the degrees of freedom started getting constrained, right? So when we did network wide modeling and longer term design work, part of what I enjoyed about it is that you could do what ifs on all kinds of constraints. It was a highly unconstrained environment, right? But as you get into decision cycles that are more near term, right, those constraints get hardened. And it's partly based on how organizations have historically operated, it's partly on how supply chains have been structured, right? It's like you make these decisions when you're entering a new market, when you have an acquisition or you're launching a new product, and then they set like concrete, right? And no
Yes.
one goes back and questions those policies. And so when we think of design and modeling, I like to think of it in terms of nodes, flows, and policies. And yes, you can't change a node every time, even though you could have more optionality on those nodes, right? Whether they're sources of supply or manufacturing or distribution. Flows, you can definitely change flows in a more on of an ongoing basis. And definitely policies, more and more of these policies are getting questioned, right? As that modeling competency is being brought from not just those long-term decisions, but to more near-term decisions, especially as the world is changing so much more rapidly. And the fundamental assumptions you make 9 months ago may not be valid today, right? I think the need for bringing those degrees of freedom and those constraints and unraveling them in near-term decision cycles is becoming more and more important, right? The good news with all of that is the new architectures for systems and technologies helps support that in a far better way than what existed 5 to 10 years ago even. And so that's the opportunity that exists is I think bringing those modeling competencies to more near-term decisions, but it requires a fundamentally different approach of doing things, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to still have to recreate your starting baseline every time and go and chase all that data, it's going to take a long time,
Yeah.
right?
No, I love the decision funnel example, Pratap, because that's a great way to frame. So, Sarah, to bring this back, the decision funnel is going down. As these competencies exist inside businesses, they're getting drawn. It was 10 years ago, they would only be asked strategic questions. Now, in the decision funnel, they are getting asked these, hey, what about next week? And especially if you have even something like a classic use case, rough cut capacity planning, whether that goes into planning or design, has always been an open question, right? With that kind of a model, the level of granularity you can put in a rough cut capacity planning model, they're not only asking an annual budgeting question every year. That used to be the use case. Annual budgeting, you need rough cut capacity planning. They're asking daily level questions, weekly level questions. Every week there's a new question that needs to be answered. And the companies have come to realize that this is the right place to go, right? The planning teams are the right place to go, how to run the business on an ongoing basis. The modeling team is where they want to go to ask questions about the business. And the questions are no longer strategic only. Now the questions are getting tactical and operational
Yes.
as the team that answers these questions. Like that, there was no team to answer these questions. Now this group has been recognized as the team that will answer all these questions.
I think what's really interesting, Ganesh, is Razat talks about these COEs exist now, and people are starting to recognize, like, oh, these guys really give us the types of insights that we're looking for. Let's push them to the next level. If they can solve for that, then I don't see why they couldn't help us with this problem. And then they get more and more questions thrown at them. This is what they tell us about, right? And so what have they started to do?
Yes.
They've started to connect other systems. So, okay, I don't just need a modeling engine. Now I need an Alteryx. I need something that's going to help me repeat this part of my process. And I have to prepare my data somewhere else. I have to have data staged somewhere else. And so I need to create some data lake location. And I not only need these pre-canned reports that are coming out of my engine, but I need to explode those back out to something that the business understands. So I create this web of these interconnected solutions that aren't even built to connect. And for lack of a better word, it's a mess, but they get it to work. They sort of string it together, but it's hard. And really what's happened is that engine is really being used as a black box now. And they've created or made what they need around it, this ecosystem, to make it work to solve more problems faster.
That's right.
So Razat, I don't remember the first time you saw Lyric. It probably was me that showed it to you. I don't know who demoed it. Maybe Sara, maybe me. What was your impression when you saw what we were doing at Lyric for the first time?
Firstly, I'm very familiar with the founding team, right?
Yes.
Both of you and all the fantastic people like Ronan and Sarang and Karthik and Vish. You guys have just a great team, and I enjoy spending time with all of you. I can riff on supply chain and modeling and planning and data science talk with you folks, right? But then when you guys and Ganesh walked me through the thought process you had around really taking a platform approach to really providing that decision-making platform focused on the supply chain, where you were not going to be bound by a rigid data model or a rigid package application, but really provide a sort of a next generation architecture for these organizations to really be able to build applications that were purpose built while leveraging these, I think of them as Lego blocks, and being able to have this composability layer, right, while leveraging all the richness of the data and the algorithmic techniques that you bring into market. That rang a very sort of a positive tone for me, because I know there's a massive need for this in the market. Look, there's a role that packaged applications play in the supply chain. The processes and the inputs and the outputs are fairly well defined, right? And they're standardized, right? And so the way you function within the four walls of the warehouse There's a certain number of ways you can do it, and you define it, and there's fantastic warehouse management systems, or the way you run your transportation management processes, right? Or your sourcing processes. So these are fairly well defined, and they lend themselves very well to packaged applications. But a big part of where the leakage in value, or the opportunity, if you want to put a positive light to it, exists is in what happens and how decisions need to get made that transcend these packaged applications. And frankly, their decisions are within the cracks of these packaged applications. I remember working with a grocery retailer in Germany. They had a brilliant idea to have a more dynamic orientation to making their sourcing decisions, right? Grocery retail is a low margin business, as we all know, right? So
yes.
Every little cent you shave off has a material impact. And they wanted to empower their buyers, not even their supply chain teams, their buyers, to be able to make more dynamic pricing decisions based on the total landed cost, right? Now, total landed cost is factoring in the bulk of the total landed cost are supply chain costs for most of those kinds of product categories.
That's right.
And so they're like, we can't find a packaged application that is bringing together supply chain costs and constraints and surfacing that for the persona being a buyer in the merchandising part of their organization. And so a capability like that does not fit into the four walls of a packaged application. And in the supply chain, there are thousands of use cases, right?
Yes.
That go from across sourcing to manufacturing, production, distribution, logistics and transportation, inventory, fulfillment of the customers, and everything in between, right? That require these capabilities, right? The way I think about the Lyric platform being able to enable that across the different time horizons of the decision funnel, and being able to provide powerful capabilities that can bring all the data ingestion and data curation capabilities with the algorithmic capabilities for decision making from a combination of optimization and machine learning and other kind of constructs, generative AI constructs, and then have that app development composition layer. I think it's really, there's a need for that in the market, right? There's a business need for that in the market because a lot of the pain points cannot be solved just with packaged applications. And at the same time, you don't want to be custom building everything by writing new code everywhere, because who's going to maintain all that? That's the other end of the spectrum. That's not the right solution. So this new architecture gives you that composability, gives you that uniqueness. In that example of the grocery retailer, this became a big form of competitive advantage for them, right? And they were able to do that by bringing data from their TMS, their purchase order management system, their ERP system, and all the different supply chain systems that they had, which led to this total landed cost model. But to do that, you needed an app development composability layer that made it very simple for the buyer to use that capability without all the complexity that was behind the scenes. And that's a fundamentally different architecture from just a packaged application. And
Yes.
That's what Lyric is doing. And that's why I find it super exciting. And I think it's a massive opportunity for supply chains around the world.
I remember, Sarah, we talked to Razat as soon as we kind of zeroed in on this idea that, hey, this is what we want to work on. And he got it in 2 minutes. And I remember, Razat, you said one thing. He said, idea is great, but you better architect it right. Right?
I remember that because I've got scars. You don't see the scars, but I've made every mistake you can imagine. And to build something like this while the need is there and the idea is brilliant, and you guys obviously have a strong team, but to architect this requires some strong technical chops, right? And yeah. Remember that push with you and Ronan and Karthik and team.
Yeah. Chicago dinner,
Yeah,
some fancy Mediterranean restaurant.
Yeah. And so, Ganesh, how has it been in the journey so far? Tell us about, it's been what, a little over 2 years now? 3 years? 3 years now? Wow. Time flies. Who's counting? How has it been, the good, the bad, the ugly, of starting from an idea and a concept to where you guys are at, where you're working with Fortune 500 companies?
It's been fantastic, right? So building a platform versus an application Razat, it's not 2x harder, it's not 3x harder, it's 10x harder, right?
Yeah.
It's 10x harder because you got to leave everything at a level of abstraction that's close enough where the last mile of work is very easy to do,
Yeah.
but abstract enough where you have the flexibility of doing many things, right? So
Yeah.
trying to figure out that balance, how baked does the pizza need to be, where it's
Yeah.
you can reheat it and feels like you just baked it versus like it's not too raw, right? So that thing is a very fine balance, and it's not been done in the world of supply chain and operations. So that was a learning experience, and we are very grateful for the experiences that we had building OpEx, working with Llamasoft to say, hey, look, we have an understanding of training to calibrate it correctly. Let's put
Yeah.
it that way. So that we feel very fortunate about that. That was hard, which also meant that we had to be very patient, Prasad. But the general consensus is, hey, build an MVP, get it to the market, and like iterate with the market. But if building the MVP itself is like an 18 to 24-month cycle,
Yeah.
the customers don't want to waste their time working
Yeah.
with a half-baked product. So that was hard to be patient, right?
Yeah.
To keep building, be in stealth, and not talk a lot about what we're doing. That was hard. What was super gratifying was, man, it's a candy store out there. I'll tell you that, Razak. I think we keep talking about this all the time. The component level technology that's available today
Yeah.
compared to what we had 10 years ago. We keep referring back to the MAD landscape, which is like a landscape that talks about the data analytics and machine learning landscape. That has exploded 20x in the last 10
Yeah.
years, right? So a lot of what we have to do is cherry picking the right components, making it all talk together well,
Yeah.
and then magic can happen. And we've realized the four axes of innovation is one on data. There is so much innovation that is possible there. It used to be that when you're building a supply chain software, you would, pick a database, load data in the database, and move it to the application layer.
Yeah.
Today, Razat, you have to build a data architecture, right? And that's
Yeah.
like knowing how to work with databases, but Spark-like technology and iceberg kind of technology, bring it all together where you get speed where you want speed, you get scale where you want to scale. So that there's a lot of innovation possible on the data layer. Algorithms, that's easy to say. Everybody keeps talking about AI. So obviously the algorithm layer technology is easy to understand. There is innovation in machine learning. There is still a lot of innovation happening on the optimization side. There is innovation happening on the Gen AI side. So you're spoiled for choices on the algorithm layer. The axis that supply chain people have not understood, and we have also discovered and learned over the last 3 years, Prasad, and that we're super excited about, is the compute layer. Because we sat primarily in either a desktop environment in the modeling world or a single server kind of environment, we have not innovated on the compute side. I think we are discovering there's so much innovation by two dimensions on compute. One is distributed compute.
Yep.
Distributed compute today is not a fancy term, point and click. I want to solve this part on one server, the second part on another server. I can make it all happen at the same time. I can daisy chain things. And I'll tell you this, supply chain people, once you show them that distributed compute can be in a no code workflow, they have the intuition to use it. That's what
Yeah.
we discovered. We have a use case where a customer is doing a network plan, right? Feeding the network plan into a production scheduling engine, right?
Yep.
From the production scheduling engine, they get the production run strategy for the next 6 months. Using that run strategy, they run an inventory optimization. So they're not running the inventory optimization on a theoretical production run strategy, right? Like once every 4 weeks, once every 2 weeks. No. Let's take the next 6 months of demand. Let's figure out what will the likely production schedule be.
Yeah.
Use that schedule in IO. And that is daisy chaining algorithm one to algorithm two to algorithm three. And all of this can happen efficiently only because you have distributed compute. So
Yeah.
that's one. And on the compute part B is, Razak, the GPU versus CPU.
Yeah.
Supply chain world has, at general enterprise compute,
Yes.
we assume that everything is going to be on CPU, right?
Yeah.
Now, accelerated compute from NVIDIA, I think that's a net new innovation
Yeah.
that people are trying to figure out what to do with it. I
Yeah.
think we've committed ourselves in that dimension because we are seeing like 200x, 300x speed up in some use cases. You
Yeah.
talked about the landed cost for the grocer, Razat. That specific use case, cost to serve in transportation heavy thing, that
Yeah.
goes 300 times faster,
Yeah.
right? With accelerated compute. If it can go 300 times faster with accelerated compute,
Yeah.
now we're doing modeling where, hey, in every market, I want to see the total marginal cost to serve
Yeah.
every store. So I can take out that store, run the model, put that store, run the model, do it for every single store. So there are 600 scenarios being run,
Yeah.
and that takes an hour, right? It would have taken 3 weeks to run that model, right? Now you can run 600 scenarios. And the last thing is experience, right? There is so much innovation that can happen on the experience side. You can build quick apps in no time. You can give APIs. That's something you are a big proponent of. Hey, why are we living in a world of only application as the interface? APIs are also an interface. So you can build a beautiful solution in Lyric, and that can talk directly to your planning system, that can talk to
Yep.
your ERP in an API to API talking to each other. Right?
Yeah.
That's the foundation of agentic AI. Right? So it's been fun to do all of these things. Customers are loving it. Right? The last 12 months, we've gone a little bit more commercial. We put a sales team in place. So we're talking to more customers. The love we're getting from the market is just simply amazing, Razat. Right?
Yeah.
Sir, you want to add anything to that? Sorry.
Yeah.
I remember in my modeling days, they'd be like, can you do this or can you do that? And I'd be like, you can do it. You can make this happen, but you can do this. And there was always a no in there somewhere.
Yeah.
With this, the answer is always yes, you can do it.
Yeah.
Is it complex though? Yes. I also think that it's complex because we are trying to do something different and that we're empowering the modeler. We don't want this to just be possible for us. We don't want to fix these capabilities in the back end. We want to make it as flexible and agile as possible for the modelers, which is something completely new for them. So figuring out what should be a module, how do we break down the engines, and what pieces of engine should we offer separately, what should we pull together, how should we let them interact with it, what sort of features, functions will they want. I think we have fun with it, but it's definitely a puzzle that we continue to put together. I think our users are having a blast, and we continue to strive to make them happier and happier.
Yeah, it's so good to hear this, and none of this happens without a lot of hard work and grind, right? So that's always part of the journey. You've got to enjoy it. But what's exciting to me is with these new forms shaping up on the data foundation side, right? We can talk about graphs and ontologies.
Yes.
That's a paradigm shift from the old traditional relational database constructs, right? It has a massively exciting potential for us to unlock in how supply chains are represented in these digital models. And then decoupling this data foundation layer from the algorithmic and the application layer, having that composability. And yes, it provides you tremendous amount of flexibility and extensibility. But part of what I love about what Lyric is doing is it's doing that still focused on the world of supply chain. And by the way, the world of supply chain is not a small world. Okay, no, it's two words, but it's like from here to Timbuktu and everything in between, right? But when you think about manufacturing, retail, logistics operations, like it encompasses, in most cases, over 70, 80% of what these organizations do, right? So it's a big scope. And I think the exciting thing is with these new data foundations, with these new application and platform architectures, with these new forms of innovation happening in the AI world and on the compute side, what you said, Ganesh, right? I think what we have the opportunity to do is to really reimagine how decisions get made across the supply chain, right? And frankly, it's going to unravel for us new forms of input that the supply chain world just wasn't geared to factor in just because of limitations on data ingestion and processing, etc., right? Or there were limitations to what factors could be modeled within an engine. All of that can be reimagined now, right? And so the possibilities are infinite, and that's what's exciting for me. And this platform is enabling organizations to really think out of the box and not be tied down and chained down by rigid, archaic systems that they've been used to. This really unshackles them. And when that happens, combined with a lot of the ideas and expertise you're bringing to the table beyond just your platform, that's when innovation will thrive in the supply chain. When you're unshackled by these rigid systems, by these rigid parameters, or by historical constraints, When you unshackle those, then the art of the possible will emerge, and you guys are already doing some good examples of that. So that's super exciting.
Yes. Yes. No, I bring it back full circle, Razat. You talk about fighter pilots, right? Our job is to build the plane, and we're getting solid signal from the market that the fighter pilots are ready to take this on to elevate their game. We'll give you one quote, and Sarah, you might do it a better job of giving that quote than I can. Remember this lady we showed her the product and she looked at it, she did the POC. Can you quote her properly? I know who we're talking about.
Basically, she said, if my company, I'm not going to name companies, but if my company doesn't bring Lyric in, then I don't want to be part of this company. Like, she saw the vision. And I think too, Ganesh, this woman in Razat, this is to a point we alluded to, but like, yeah, they're fighter pilots, but it shouldn't just be about the fighter pilots.
Exactly.
The supply chain is end to end. There are planners, there are analysts, there are engineers.
Yeah.
And that's where I actually really love what we're doing at Lyric and the people we're getting to work with, because we're democratizing this to a bit.
Yes.
This woman was not the fighter pilot, but she was an extension of that fighter pilot team who wanted in on the game. And there's no reason why she can't be in on that game. She can, because you can work together. The fighter pilots can tee it up. They can do what they do best, and she can knock it out of the park by using what they're doing. They can automate it. Yeah. We're helping these modelers, the analysts, to automate things. Like you said, Ganesh, we're giving them the power to set up distributed compute. We're giving them the power to change the front end in any way they want. These are things that these people have not had access to, and that I think that's part of the real fun.
And I think part of that brilliant opportunity is that the fighter pilots can then architect and serve up very valuable capabilities for the organization in a very simplified way. And that's really what ends up democratizing and extending the value and the usage from not just limited to these 5, 10, 15, 20 people, but to hundreds and thousands of people in the enterprise. And that's where the impact just amplifies.
100%.
Okay, so we have 3 minutes left. So I'm going to ask both of you your perspective on modeling and analysis, knowing the whole conversation, bringing this all down. If you were to give advice to those who are in the market right now thinking, what's next? Where should I be pivoting to set myself up for success in the next 5 to 10 years? What would your advice to them be, Razat?
I would first start with take the time to prepare that always-on baseline. And the fancy word for that is the digital twin of the supply chain or the portion of the supply chain network that you're modeling, right? Yeah. It has to be always on, which means it needs to have connectivity to your enterprise applications and is reflective of the current state in a very current way. Because once you're able to do that, amazing things can happen. And that's something that I would say the majority of these modeling centers of excellence still don't have today. The second thing I would recommend is you are leveraging this always-on baseline and running all kinds of analysis for the organization, helping with decision-making that leadership may be involved with. Also think about those kinds of use cases or decisions that could be surfaced to the buying organization, the sales and marketing organization, the planning organization, the transportation organization, that can be served up in a simplistic way, right? And platforms and architectures like Lyric allow you to do that in a very systemic way, right? And that's going to increase the impact of what this modeling and analysis center of excellence is doing, right? What the historical design teams are doing is going to allow you to have impact on an ongoing basis, right? And the third thing I would suggest is you've got to think out of the box in terms of not just the algorithmic techniques, because these algorithmic techniques are evolving and changing. There's a lot of innovation still happening in the world of optimization, in the world of simulation, but also in layering in some of these machine learning constructs. And by the way, they have a huge amount of opportunity for modeling work. One of the inputs into most of the supply chain design and modeling work is demand, right? Back 30 years ago, when I was a very bad modeler, demand was like you just figured out how to get some kind of a dump, and you maybe extrapolated in some simplistic way historical data and you use that as input, right? Now there's so many smarter ways and more informed ways of factoring in demand, both long-term demand as well as near-term demand. And a lot of them require outside inputs, right? So the data inputs are changing. The approaches to how you forecast demand are fundamentally changing in big ways, from old statistical models to much more evolving and always evolving machine learning oriented models, right? And so you as a modeler and a design and modeling center of excellence, it's going to be important for you to keep pace with what's shaping up in these evolving capabilities. And that's going to allow you to think out of the box, both in terms of how to frame these decision-making elements, but also what are the inputs. The inputs could be very different from a lot of the input into like demand planning is point of sale data. And that features into your modeling and design work, with some kind of an aggregation and an extrapolation. That's not going to be good enough anymore, right? And the more you get into more granular, the more near-term time horizons, you're going to have to be more and more granular about representing the different costs, constraints, and different elements of your supply chain. As a modeling and design team, keeping pace with the rapidly evolving world of AI, data architectures, systems architectures, new forms of data and input is going to be critical because I think this whole space will evolve very rapidly. And by the way, if you're not using Lyric within the next 12 to 18 months, you're making a huge mistake because you're missing the boat, because you can do all of these complicated things in a far more structured and simplified way using Lyric.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Ganesh,
Thank you, Razat.
do you have other advice? Do you have more? Do you want to impart some of your wisdom on this?
Razat framed it up very nicely. One thing I want to add is your talent is ready. Your talent inside these businesses,
Yeah.
the modeler of today is very differently oriented than the modeler 20 years ago. They still understand supply chain, don't get me wrong, but they're a lot more fluent in the modern technology than we would give them credit to. So that having that intuition that your teams are evolving and you got to find them the right technology paradigm for them to build a career on for the next 10 years. I think I would encourage leaders, chief digital officers and chief supply chain officers to think about that as one thing. And because I love my data scientists more than anybody else, or OR scientists, you need the scientists in the
Yes.
business. Don't get me wrong. You need the fantastic data architects, data engineers. Don't get me wrong there either. You need your planners to keep the business running, humming. You need all these personas, right? But we think the central persona that could decide the future of supply chain inside large enterprises is going to be your supply chain
Yeah.
modeler. This is a very special class of people who understand both the nuances of the supply chain and the nuances and the limitation of math and science to think about the supply chain. So they have a very balanced view of both sides. And I think so. Remember that, and remember that they need to have better technology, right?
Yeah, supply chain, the modelers will shape the future of supply chains, right? And I think probably in more profound ways going forward than they ever have been able to because of all these underlying capabilities.
Yes.
And I think the form of that modeler is expanding. There'll be different classes of modelers. They'll be working together. They'll be taking on specialties. I think that's really what's going to make this engine start to go.
Yes.
I know we're at time. Razat, thank you so much for spending an hour of your day with us. We really appreciate it. I think this is really getting exciting and we're having lots of great conversations, and we reserve the right to bring you back to talk about planning and data science.
Happy to. Well, really enjoyed that. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot for that.